In 1984, inside a quiet English village near the border of Wales, an old stone cottage became the center of a mystery that no one has fully explained. A schoolteacher named Ken Webster kept a small home computer. It was a simple machine used for writing lessons and schoolwork. One evening, after the house had been empty, words appeared on the screen which no one had typed. At first, it seemed like a prank. Maybe a friend was playing a trick, but the messages kept coming. They were written in strange, old-style English. The writer claimed he was a man living in the year 1546 that could use a computer. Months later, another voice joined the messages. This one did not claim to be from the past, but from the future, the year 2109. It spoke about time as if it were something that could be crossed. It gave hints instead of clear answers, which... Okay, alright 2109, thanks for the awesome answers, bro. So what really happened inside of Meadow Cottage in 1984? Can messages travel across time? Did the small computer open a doorway between centuries? Today, we will explore the mystery of Dodleston Messages and examine the strange events that turned an ordinary cottage into one of the most debated time communication cases in modern history. Also, I ran a poll the other day about taking my Impala on these trips that I have planned up with the, the Pale Crawler and all that stuff. It appears definitely take the Impala was the top one. Granted, all of them were me taking the Impala, and I don't know why I ran that poll. In autumn of 1984, the air in Dodleston was cool and damp. At the center of the village stood Meadow Cottage, an old 18th century house with thick stone walls and small windows that looked out onto quiet fields. Inside the cottage lived Ken Webster, an economics teacher at a local high school. He was practical and calm, more comfortable with numbers and lesson plans than with ghost stories. Living with him was his girlfriend, Debbie, who was young, thoughtful, and curious. Their friend, Nicola Bagley, a teacher and musician, was visiting and spending time at the house. Also, there are two birds outside my window, as it is spring, and spring has sprung, and they're arguing. So, if you hear that, just enjoy the beautiful melodic sounds of birds yelling at each other. So, Ken was busy renovating the cottage. There were tools on the floor, fresh paint on the walls, and the sound of sanding and hammering during the day. Felt like a normal home being slowly improved. Then small things would begin to happen. One afternoon, while cleaning, Nicola noticed thin string-like markings on the wall. They looked almost like scratches or lines pressed into the paint. The three of them laughed about it and assumed it was just part of the old house. They painted over the marks and kind of forgot about them. The next day, the same markings appeared again, in the same place, under the fresh paint. This time, no one laughed. Soon after, Ken walked into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. On the floor were several tins of cat food. They were stacked neatly, almost carefully, in a small pyramid shape. Debbie and Nicola had not done it. Ken was certain he had not either, and they didn't even have a cat. They probably had a cat. They began noticing other changes. Small objects moved. Items placed in one room appeared in another. Nothing was broken or stolen, just moved. The simplest answer was a prank. They thought of John, a friend of Nicola's, and a fellow musician. Maybe he had a key. Maybe he was trying to be clever. But why stack cat food tins? Why scratch walls? The motive didn't make any sense. Plus, he's your friend. You can confront him. Still, the strange activity continued. Around this time, Ken borrowed a BBC microcomputer from the school where he had worked. It was meant to help Nicola with writing comedy sketches. The computer had a word processor program called Edward. It was modern for its time, a helpful tool that replaced slow typewriters. One weekend in December, the three of them went away to visit a friend. The cottage was empty. When they returned, Ken decided to check the computer to see if Nicola had saved any new work. He would turn on the machine, and the screen glowed softly. Lines of text began to appear, but it was not Nicola's writing. It was also not something Ken had typed. The messages were already there. The words were strange. They sounded old, almost poetic. The sentences were confusing and filled with unusual spelling. There was no name at the bottom, no clear meaning, and the room felt very still as they read it. After some time, the cottage felt normal again on most days, and life started to move forward. Then one evening, when they checked the computer once more, a new message had appeared on screen. But this time, the words were clearer and more direct. At the end of the message was a name, Lukas Wayan. The writer claimed that the cottage belonged to him. He said the people living there were strangers inside of his house. His tone sounded confused and at times upset, as if he believed someone had taken over his home without permission. He described their belongings as strange and expensive, and he questioned why his familiar rooms looked different. The message changed everything. Now, there was not just a random poem or mysterious sentence. There was a person, a voice, and a claim. Lukas said he was writing from the year 1546. The idea sounds impossible, yet the messages continued. Ken decided that if it was a prank, it was unusually detailed. And you gotta remember, the internet did not exist at this point. That's the biggest problem. That's the biggest problem here. It didn't exist, so nobody could hack your computer to this level, because how would they connect to it? But he showed text to actually the guy named Peter Trinder, an English teacher from his school. Peter studied the spelling, the grammar, and the word choices carefully. Some of the words were unfamiliar even to him, and he had to look it up in older texts. After several days of checking dictionaries and historical records, Peter made an important observation. The language looked consistent with 16th century, especially the southwest region of England. Certain regional words stood out, including the word pill, which meant small inlet along the river. That term had been used in parts of western England during the time period, it seems, and the more Peter examined the messages, the harder it became to dismiss them as careless writing. The dialect seemed deliberate and structured. It did not look like random old-fashioned spelling. As the weeks passed, Ken began writing back to Lukas through the computer. To their surprise, replies appeared. Lukas described daily life in 1546. He wrote about religion, local customs, and his worries about the political changes under King Henry VIII. He mentioned studying at Jesus College in Oxford, which later raised questions because historical records suggested the college was founded after the year Lukas claimed to attend. That's kind of a problem. Despite his timeline problem, the exchanges continued. Another strange detail soon became clear, though. The messages only appeared when no one was in the room. If Ken and Debbie waited by the computer, nothing happened. But if they left the cottage and returned later, new messages sometimes would be waiting. At the same time, the physical disturbances inside of the cottage grew stronger. Milk cartons that had been left on the counter were found lined up in unusual patterns. Jars were moved to different shelves without explanation. Small tapping sounds were heard on doors and walls, especially in the kitchen. Debbie described feeling a sudden cold touch on her cheek one evening, followed by the sensation of something lightly pulling her hair. Weird. So when she turned around quickly, no one was there. These events did not cause panic, but they did create steady unease. Debbie seemed to experience the disturbances more often than Ken. She then heard sounds more clearly. She felt the cold air more strongly. It slowly became clear that whatever was happening inside Meadow Cottage seemed to focus on her. As messages from Lukas continued to appear, the mystery continued to deepen. As winter turned into early spring in 1985, the messages from Lukas no longer felt distant or strange in the same way. They felt personal. The words on the screen carried emotion, worry, and sometimes kindness. Then, Debbie began to dream. At first, she did not think much of it. She had been reading the messages almost every day, and Lukas's words were often on her mind. But the dreams became clearer and more detailed. She described standing inside the cottage kitchen, yet it did not look exactly the same. The walls seemed older, darker, and lit by firelight instead of electric bulbs. In one dream, she saw a man standing in the corner of the room who wore simple, rough clothing from another time. His face looked surprised, almost as maybe he was confused. Like he was confused as she was confused. He spoke, but his words sounded distant and strange. Debbie was aware that she was dreaming, yet she could not control what was happening. The experience felt structured, almost like a meeting rather than a random dream. She woke up shaken, but calm enough to remember every detail. Soon after, a new message appeared on the computer. Lukas wrote about seeing a beautiful young woman appear before him. He described her as bright and unexpected, like a visitor from another world. The timing unsettled Debbie. She had not told Lukas about her dream before the message had arrived. For the first time, the connection felt two-sided in a new way. As the weeks passed, emotional strain began to grow inside of the cottage. Debbie quietly quit her job at an antique shop without telling Ken. When he found out, he felt hurt and frustrated. He needs that money. The mystery already weighed heavily on both of them, and now small disagreements turned into tense conversations. Around the same time, Debbie admitted that in one dream she and Lukas had argued. She said he behaved rudely towards a young servant girl named Catherine. Debbie felt upset by his behavior, even though it had only happened inside of her dream. When the next message appeared, Lukas seemed irritated and defensive, as if he knew about the disagreement. The overlap between dream and message became difficult to ignore. Ken began to worry that the situation was affecting their real lives, which again, how are they operating the computer? Okay. Wait a minute. Now I know how. He's a ghost inside the house. You sitting there right now have probably thought to yourself at least once in your life, how would I rapidly rebuild society if something were to happen? If you haven't, well, I think it's time you have, because who knows what's about to go down. Anyway, so today we have the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization, a captivating illustrated encyclopedia of humankind's greatest inventions and discoveries. It's not just a book, but a visual journey through the history of innovation that combines beauty, intellect, and inspiration, perfect as a gift from collectors to curious friends and colleagues. The book, as it's known, delivers rare knowledge and inspires deeper thinking. Not to mention, for any book lover in your life, whether that be you or someone you know, the visual aesthetics with its beautiful illustrations, the high quality paper used, and the cover itself all come together to create a pretty awesome piece of knowledge. You can also physically hold it, which is also pretty sweet. So, if the computers all turn against us, at least we have books. And with this knowledge, it's sure to get your brain captivated, going over humanity's achievements, or maybe even the technical minded, to even those who are just pro-human, which we all should be. And within the book, it's not just flat-out information. There are secret puzzles for you to discover and quests for readers to complete. 400 pages, 180 topics, 23 chapters, all with unique illustrations combining engineering drawings and medieval art styles. So if you're interested in expanding your mind or just obtaining the ideal gift for people with curious minds, then follow the link in the description where you can purchase the book for yourself. And when you do, make sure to use code Roanoke10 on their website to get you a 10% discount. Thank you to Hungry Minds for sponsoring this episode. Anyways, the mystery that once felt exciting now carried emotional consequences. It was no longer just about strange words on a computer screen. It was affecting trust, stress, and daily routines. Because of this, they decided to involve outsiders. The Society for Physical Research, often called SPR, was contacted. The organization had experienced investigating in unusual claims and whatnot, including hauntings and unexplained events. Ken hoped that trained investigators would either confirm something unusual or prove it was a trick. Either answer would kind of, bring relief. So when the SPR agreed to look into the case, a new stage of the mystery began. Questions about security were raised. Could someone be sneaking into the cottage? Could the computer have been tampered with at the school? Was there a hidden explanation that had been overlooked? Investigators prepared to visit Meadow Cottage. Suspicion slowly shifted. What once felt possibly supernatural now faced serious doubt. The focus turned towards the possibility of a hoax. But if it was a trick, it was one that had already grown too complicated and deeply personal, and the messages had not stopped. By the middle of 1985, the tone of the messages changed. Until then, Lukas had sounded confused, sometimes worried, but still free to write. Then one evening, a different name appeared at the end of the message. It was not Lukas. The writer himself was Thomas First. He claimed to be the sheriff. The message was firm and serious. Lukas had been arrested. He was accused of wrongdoing. He was being held in question. The sheriff warned... I'm sorry, I'm not laughing. He's like, what? But anyways, the sheriff warned Ken and Debbie that their strange communication was evil and dangerous. He demanded that they surrender this power they were using. Only then, he said, would Lukas be shown mercy. Tell him to suck it. The words on the screen felt colder than before. Ken stared at the message for a long time. If this was still a hoax, it had now become very detailed. If it was not a hoax, then a man in 1546 believed his life was in danger because of messages sent from 1984. Ken decided to respond carefully. He asked what crime Lukas had committed. He tried to explain that they meant no harm. The reply was direct. Lukas will remain in custody unless they cooperated. The situation at this point felt rather urgent. Ken began searching through history books for anything that might help. If Lukas truly lived during the time of King Henry, then religious and political tension would have been high. People were punished for small mistakes. Ken wondered if maybe he could send information for the future that might protect Lukas. After hours of research, Ken found references to a bishop connected to political conflicts during that era. He quickly typed a message to Lukas, passing along what he had discovered. The idea was simple. If Lukas could use this information wisely, it might prove his loyalty or innocence. The next evening, a new message appeared. Lukas had been released, though he was still under watch. Guards remained near his home, and he sounded weak and shaken. He thanked Ken for the help. For the first time, relief spread through the cottage instead of tension. But the relief did not last long. Soon, another message arrived that Lukas still faced serious punishment. The sheriff was not convinced. The threat of execution hung over the conversation. Send us $10 and he'll live, or whatever money they used. 10 pounds and he lives. Lukas wrote with fear and frustration. He asked for guidance and support. His words felt less like a distant history and more like a friend asking for help. Ken felt the weight of it deeply as he took long walks outside the cottage thinking about the situation. He imagined Lukas somewhere in the past, surrounded by men who believed he was dangerous. The idea seemed impossible, yet the messages felt real enough to cause real emotion. The communication would become rather urgent. Responses were sent quickly. Every new message was opened with tension. Debbie watched Ken closely, seeing how much the situation affected him. If Lukas was only a story, then why is it possible his death would feel so heavy? And if he was real, then what responsibility did they carry? None. They were just talking on the computer. The screen glowed softly in the dim room as Ken waited for the next messages, unsure whether it would bring hope or final news. The mystery had reached an emotional breaking point. But just as the danger on Lukas seemed most serious, the messages changed again. One evening, after Ken had sent another urgent reply asking about Lukas's safety, a new name appeared on the screen. It was not Lukas and not the sheriff. This message was signed with a number 2109. The writer claimed to be from the future, not a few years ahead, but more like than 100 years, but not beyond 1984. Now, this is like quick maths, right? 84 years! Very quick maths. So the tone of the messages felt calm and controlled. It spoke as if it understood everything that happened and everything that would happen next. 2109 said that Ken and Debbie were part of something larger than they realized. It suggested that their communication with Lukas was not an accident. It used words like purpose and destiny. It spoke about God, but not in a simple way. It described time as something connected, as if past, present, and future were part of one structure. It's called the fourth dimension. So, yeah. Anyways, Ken did not know how to respond. He had been trying to save the man from 1546, and now something from 2109 was telling him that history had a plan. In the next message, 2109 offered two choices. It said it could explain everything in a single moment and give them full understanding, but that understanding would come at a cost, and some events that were meant to happen might be changed. The second choice was slower and harder. They could continue as they were, learning step by step, shaping their own path without full knowledge. 2109 claimed it was not allowed to interfere directly. It described a kind of rule, a limit it could not cross. It would guide, but not control. It would suggest, but not force. The words felt careful, almost rehearsed. As the weeks passed, the situation became more complicated. Sometimes Lukas would respond quickly to a message Ken had just typed. Other times, replies seemed delayed or out of order. A few messages disappeared from the computer without explanation, and words that had been there one evening were gone the next morning. Lukas even wrote that he had not sent certain earlier messages that appeared under his name. This deeply unsettled Ken. 2109 admitted that it could move through time differently than Lukas could, and it described time as a tall structure, like a vertical plane, with a spiral staircase connecting different levels. According to 2109, Lukas could only stand on his level, but 2109 could move up and down the staircase. That meant it could see more, and possibly change more. Ken began to feel that 2109 was not a helpful guide, but an unwanted presence. He trusted Lukas, even with the danger surrounding him, but 2109 felt distant and powerful. It spoke in riddles and large ideas instead of simple answers. Now there were three voices in the story: the present, 1984, the past, 1546, and the future, 2109. And no one could be certain who was truly in control of the conversation. As the messages grew more complex and the claims became more serious, outside investigators stepped in to examine what was happening at Meadow Cottage. The Society for Physical Research, often called, again, the SPR, agreed to take a closer look. Two of its officers, John Bucknell and David Welch, visited the cottage to observe the events directly. They came with notebooks, measuring tools, and careful plans. Their goal was to test whether the strange messages could be explained by normal means. They began by tightening security inside of the house. Certain rooms were sealed. Doors had windows which were taped shut in a way that would show if they had been opened. The computer room was carefully checked. The BBC Micro was actually examined for hidden wires or unusual devices. They monitored when the machine was turned on and who had access to it. The investigators treated the cottage like a controlled experiment. If the messages continued to appear while the space was sealed and watched, that would raise serious questions. If they stopped, that might point to human involvement. Of course, 1546 and 2109 are allegedly human, so it'd still be human involvement if it was real. But during this time, the entity calling itself 2109 introduced a new idea. It claimed that it was made of tachyon particles. Tachyons are theoretical particles that some scientists have imagined could move faster than light. In physics, they remain unproven, yet 2109 spoke as if they were real and described itself as being formed from this unusual matter. It suggested that this allowed it to move through time. You know what? I already have a perfect way to figure all this out, but I'll say that to the end. David Welch decided to test the intelligence behind the messages. Without telling the others, he prepared a private question experiment. He typed a series of specific questions into the computer while alone in the sealed room. He did not speak them out loud. He did not share them with Ken or Debbie. He wanted to see whether 2109 could respond correctly. Later, answers appeared on screen. They came in the correct order. They addressed the hidden questions directly. According to Welch's account, no one else had been present in the test room to perform this test. The room had been sealed. The doors and windows had remained taped. For some observers, this was powerful evidence that something unusual was in fact occurring. But not everyone was convinced. Skeptics raised practical counterarguments. They suggested the BBC microcomputer might have had a hidden memory function or pre-programmed text that could be triggered later. They wondered whether someone with technical skill could have inserted responses ahead of time. That doesn't make any sense. Others proposed that the house might have been secretly bugged, allowing questions to be overheard from another location. Some believe the simplest explanation was human agency. Perhaps someone inside the group or someone close to them was creating the messages deliberately. The emotional tension in the house, the stress in Ken and Debbie's relationship, and the earlier suspicion of a prank all added weight to this theory. The investigation did not provide a clear conclusion, however. Instead, it deepened the mystery. On one side stood those who believed the sealed room and secret tests pointed to something beyond normal explanation. On the other side stood those who believed that clever tricks and overlooked details could still explain everything. As the messages continued, a quiet truth finally surfaced. The man who had called himself Lukas was not Lukas at all. His real name, revealed slowly through careful messages, was Thomas Howarden. He explained that the false name had been used out of fear and protection, not deception. In his time, names carried danger, and the wrong one could lead to arrest or worse. Thomas described his real life with more detail than ever before. He spoke of Oxford and his studies there. He explained that he had once been connected to the university but had been expelled. The reason was religion. England was changing fast, and old beliefs were becoming dangerous. Thomas had been caught on the wrong side of power, and that mistake followed him for the rest of his life. As trust grew, Thomas shared something far more painful. He spoke of a young girl named Catherine. She was only 14 years old. Rumors had spread in his village that she was a witch. Fear ruled the people, and fear demanded punishment. At first, the story came through as uncertain, as if Thomas himself could not bear to say it clearly, and later messages confirmed the truth. Catherine was dead. The weight of this revelation hit Ken hard. Even though he lived centuries later, he felt involved. He had sent information, he had asked questions, and encouraged Thomas to explain his life, and Ken began to feel guilt even though he knew he could not change the past. The distance of time did not lessen the emotional impact. In an unexpected turn, the roles between them would shift. Instead of asking for help, Thomas began to comfort Ken. His message became calm and thoughtful. He reminded Ken that some events could not be undone, and that blame could travel unfairly across time. He spoke with the voice of someone who had already lost everything important. I'm assuming Catherine was his daughter. And then he lost, or something. Anyways, so now their conversations carried trust, understanding, and a shared sorrow. Against all reason and logic, a real relationship and friendship had taken shape, reaching across time itself. By the mid-1980s, the long investigation was losing energy. The careful watch at Meadow Cottage was actually coming to an end. The Society for Physical Research reviewed the events, the sealed rooms, the private tests, and the strange replies on the computer screen. In the end, their report did not confirm anything paranormal. The official conclusion leaned towards a hoax. They stated that there was no solid proof of spirits, time travel, or unknown forces. After that, the officers who had once visited the cottage stepped back from the case. Their names slowly faded from public discussion, and the investigation was quietly closed. Inside the cottage, the tone of the messages would then change again. Thomas wrote that he was preparing to return to Oxford. He said he could not remain where he was and that his path was leading him away. His words felt distant, as if he had already was stepping back from the connection. At the same time, he claimed that 2109 had altered some of the earlier messages. According to Thomas, certain words that appeared under his name were not truly his. This shook Ken deeply. If messages could be changed, then how much of their friendship had been pure and how much had been guided, or how much of it had just been completely made up? Trust, which had taken years to build, began to weaken. The idea that 2109 might have interfered created doubt in every message that followed. By 1987, the final messages arrived. By that time, nearly 300 communications had appeared over 3 years. The exchanges that once felt urgent and emotional grew shorter, and then suddenly they stopped completely. The screen remained blank. No more names appeared. No more voices from 1546 or 2109 returned. After the communication ended, theories spread quickly. Skeptics suggested that Debbie may have written those messages herself. Some argued that the entire story was a marketing plan connected to Ken's later book. Others proposed a psychological explanation, suggesting a split personality or subconscious writing. A few critics claimed that the historical research could have been forged or carefully assembled from library sources. Supporters pointed to details they believed were hard to dismiss. Peter Trinder, an English teacher who studied the language of the earlier messages, argued that the dialect matched forms in the 16th century of southwest England. He noted regional words and spellings that were not commonly known. These linguistic markers, he said, would have required deep and specific knowledge. There were also claims of predictions within the messages. Some supporters believed references pointed towards the later death of Princess Diana, though critics argued the wording was vague. Others connected certain statements to scientific ideas such as dark energy, which became widely discussed years later. There were even personal details about individuals like Gary Rowe that seemed difficult to explain depending on which side of the debate one accepted. The academic world did not agree on the language question. Dr. Laura Wright, a specialist in historical linguistics, argued that the writing did not accurately match true early modern English. She suggested that it mixed styles in a way that was not natural for the 16th century writer. This led to a debate between scholars who studied early modern English and those who focused on older forms like Middle English. Debate of the nerds. The arguments continued even now. Some see clever deception, others see something unexplained. The computer screen is dark now, but the mystery it once displayed is still open, waiting for each person to decide what they believe. So, as always, breaking in here is Roanoke Tales. Easy way to solve this whole problem. Right? You're made of tachyon particles. That's great and all. I'm proud of you for being a tachyon. I'm going to put something in the wall of this cottage behind a brick. And here's how you can do this, right? Tachyon particles. Does this cottage still exist in the future? Yes? Cool. Was it altered as far as you know? No? Cool. All right. Well, behind one of the stones in the northwest corner of the house, about 8 stones up, I'm going to put a drawing in a plastic bag. What is that drawing? Go find it. Oh, you can't. Okay. Well, then you're not real. Like, it's just stuff like that. 1546 man. Obviously, we're in the same cottage. Everything here looks pretty much the same. Describe your surroundings. Cool. 8th stone up, northwest corner of the house. Put something behind it that's gonna last. Put a, carve a smiley face into a rock. Why not just carve a smile on the inside of the rock? Boom, there you go. Well, looky there. I don't see a smiley face. It's just stuff like that, right? It's always, there's ways to figure it out. That's very simple. Okay. First off, do we even talk about this guy anymore? Stephen Hawking. Ooh, God. But basically, his whole concept, like, let's just go with the concept he had, not what he was potentially doing. Ooh, God. If he was potentially doing anything, well, I hope he's having fun burning in hell. But the point is, he basically did like they're time travelers, and he set up a party, and nobody showed up to his party, probably because he's on a specific list. And, oh my God. Okay, unrelated. Can you imagine? Maybe that's why nobody showed up to his party, because this stuff came out after he died, and now everybody's like, I don't want to go to that party. Maybe time travel is real, and nobody wanted to go to his party. Oh my God. Anyways, so he set up a party and was like, hey, after the fact, he released the date to show up, and there were no time travelers. Probably because nobody wants to hang out with a time traveler who's on an E-list. Or, not time travel. Nobody wants to hang out with a guy who's on an E-list. Anyways, probably more horrific things are going to be found out. Horrors within man-made comprehension aside. There's an easy way to figure out if somebody's a time traveler or not, depending on how committed to the idea they are. Like, if I'm talking to somebody from 2109 and they're like, hey, I'm in your house, I'm in your walls, can you leave something behind that I can go find so that I can prove to you that, this is the future? I'm going to probably go do that. I'm going to find a spot in the house where I'm like, yeah, here's where I put this. Nobody would, unless they tear down the house, this should still be there. Boom, you do that, right? That's the best way to do it. If you're not doing that, then you're not from the future and you're not from the past. I'm sorry. That just sounds like, to me, somebody screwing with somebody. And after doing that test where they fully sealed the room and then they labeled it later as a hoax, that says to me they're like, yeah, this is a hoax. So that's just what I believe. I want to hear what you guys think. I do appreciate you watching. If you did enjoy, then please leave a like. It's helping get the video out there. And subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Instagram, Roanoke gaming link, and Patreon link if you'd like to support the channel. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Gradius, Monkey Man, Scrungle, Invictus Echo, and the Homeless Guy on the Street. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness event tier, we have Beamer Laga, Eddie the Yeti, Dragon Master Knight, and Hope Blighton. At the First 10 Accounts tier, we have the Soggy Anglerfish, Acidity, Need Extra Lives, and Troy, as well as Pouches, except Troy and Pouches are in the second-hand accounts tier. Regardless, I appreciate y'all's support. Thank you, everybody else, for your support as well. I do appreciate it as well. And that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed. Don't forget to vibe check your time travelers, and I will see y'all in the next one.